Hey, what's up guys? My name is Lauren and welcome to my channel, and today we are going to be doing my November wrap up. I read 6 books in the month of November, and I did actually abandon part of my TBR at the very end because I was so excited for the reindeer readathon that I'm participating in this month of December. So I did successfully finish 6 of them, and let's just go ahead and jump right into those. So the first book that I finished in November, which was actually a carryover from the month of October, was Winter Counts by David Heska Wombley-Wyden, and this is an Own Voices Native American story about the Lakota tribe. It is also a debut novel. I ended up giving this one 4.5 stars. I thought it was really solid, but it was pretty slow in some areas, and the story starts immediately, and I was a little concerned when I first started out because of the graphic detail and violence that it entailed in the very first scene of the story, but I did actually enjoy the main character's perspective, and I also listened to the audiobook of this, and I think that really helped me get through it more quickly than I would have if I read it physically. But this story follows Virgil Wounded Horse, who is a sort of vigilante on this reservation, and it also discusses how a lot of Native Americans are treated on these reservations. So on Indian reservations, a lot of the time a normal justice system would not act on a crime if it was anything less than murder. So Virgil steps in those instances and kind of serves justice in his own way against these perpetrators. And so the very beginning of the story actually starts with him seeking justice for young children that have been abused by, I believe he was a coach at the school on the reservation or something like that, but gets paid to go and kind of mess people up basically for their wrongdoings on other people. And in the start of the story, we find out that his nephew has nearly died from an overdose of heroin, and Virgil finds out that there are these outside forces trying to bring in this new drug to the reservation, and so he kind of gets involved with trying to infiltrate a Mexican cartel and discover how exactly these drugs are getting into the reservation and what they can do to stop it. And so there are a lot of suspenseful, dark topics throughout this story, but I thought that it was really good. And actually something that I would also be interested in is at the very end of the story, it kind of leaves it open-ended that we may get another story from Virgil's perspective. I did like hearing the story from Virgil's perspective, and I also really liked learning about the lives of these people who live on Indian reservations in the United States. And there is actually an author's note at the very end where he discusses a lot of these topics, and I thought that was very important to read as well. And the next one is also one that I had started in October during a 24-hour readathon, but I didn't get a chance to finish it that day, but I did finish it in early November, and it is Home Before Dark by Riley Sager, and I gave this story 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. And we follow Maggie, who is a home renovator, and when she was a child she lived in this large home and it was basically haunted, and her father wrote a story about it that became a national sensation. And so her and her family have gotten a lot of attention from this, and a lot of people also don't believe that the story is true, and Maggie herself, not remembering these things that her father says happened in the book, doesn't believe them either. And the story starts off with her father passing away, and Maggie realizes that her family still owns the house even though they fled from it in the night 20 years before, and she decides to go back and renovate it to sell it. And we also have a dual perspective here. We also get excerpts from her father's book that he wrote and published while Maggie is also staying in the home. So we get to see things happen to her throughout the story, and then there's another element to it where we see something kind of similar or an explanation for that had happened in the past when she was a child. And it's very spooky. I really enjoyed this, and the end of it was super twisty. There were several plot twists that just kind of came one right after the other, and I just really love Riley Sager's writing a lot in his thrillers, and I think the only one I have left is Lock Every Door, and I know that's a lot of people's favorites. So I'm really looking forward to getting to that one as well. But like I said, I gave this one 5 stars, and I really enjoyed this one as well. And the next one I read was Sanctuary by Abby Sher and Paolo Mendoza. And this story follows Valley, who lives in a very near future dystopian world where the United States, people live with chips implanted in them, and it's how you kind of buy your groceries and how people also determine if you are living in America undocumented. So Valley was brought here by her mother and father as a very young child, and so she is an undocumented resident of the United States. So we immediately jump into the action where she fears for hers and her family's life. And it's also interesting to see how her younger brother's perspective, who was born in the United States, how that privilege affects him and his views on things. But the story follows when her mom's counterfeit chip that they have starts to malfunction, and there are riots happening in California. California has decided to secede from the United States, and they are becoming a sanctuary state for these undocumented residents. So Valley and her mother and brother decide to head to New York City, where they will find somebody who will have the access to get them to California safely. But on the way, her mother is captured by these guards because her chip has officially malfunctioned and they know her status. So Valley and her little brother are forced to go on the trip the rest of the way on their own. And it is truly a heart-wrenching story because it's told from a 16-year-old girl's perspective, when these are concerns that she should not even have as a child, but she's basically lived her life with this fear. I think it being from Valley's perspective is also what makes it super powerful. And I personally had a lot of anxiety while reading this because I just had to know what was next. I could not put it down. It was a super fast read. It does read a little bit more middle grade. I think it would be perfect for children who are transitioning from middle school into high school. It does read very much that age range, which makes sense because Valley is 16. And I really enjoyed this story, and I actually tweeted the authors on Twitter because I needed to know if they were going to write any more, because it does not wrap up very neatly. And they said that they are going to be writing more, so I'm very eager to get more of Valley's story and figure out how everything will work out in the future for her. And I also don't know if I said this, but I gave this 5 stars. I think it was probably my favorite of the entire month. The next book that I read was You Had Me at Hola by Alexis Daria, and I think that I kind of got in my head a little bit while reading this because I've heard very mixed reviews on it, but it is a romance following 2 telenovela stars who are love interests on the show that they're working on, but they eventually become interested in real life as well. I did kind of struggle at the beginning because it's hard to kind of get to know the characters. I felt invested in the romance kind of once it got more involved down the road, and I was actually very intrigued by the telenovela aspect of it, and I actually became invested in the story that was happening on the telenovela, because in like the first 3/4 of the book we do kind of shift back and forth. Every other chapter or so you would get like the actual story that was happening on the show that they were working on. And I thought that was pretty interesting, and I really did actually like that story and become interested in what was going to happen there. But I think, too, this is supposed to be an adult, but it reads a little more new adult. The characters are supposed to be older, but they don't necessarily feel older by their actions and the way they handle things. And I think that some of the drama was a little bit over the top, but at the end of the day, I was kind of invested in the two together once they did get more involved, and I decided to give this 4 stars. I struggled between 3 and 4, but I feel like at the end I did enjoy it enough that that 4-star rating was deserved. And the next book that I read was one that I had been anticipating because I've read the entire series, and it is Troublesome Paradise by Ellen Hildebrand. I did give this one 4 stars. It wasn't as action-packed or as intriguing as the other two stories in this series. So I definitely think this could have probably been like a duology and wrapped up with the second book. This one was basically just kind of a lot of filler in order to wrap up the overall storyline. So since this is the third in the series, the first book actually follows a woman who finds out that her husband has passed away in a plane crash while he is on a work trip. Well, then she also finds out that another woman and the pilot died in that plane crash as well. And so ultimately she finds out that her husband had a lot of secrets related to his job, and he also basically had an entirely other life on this island that he was often going to while he worked. So her two sons and her, they go to this island to handle the assets and things that he has left there, and then they start to kind of piece together what was his life on this island, and they meet other people who were the family and friends of that woman that died with him on the plane as well. And so the first two books kind of followed the secrets coming together of this man's work and the personal life that he had created while on St. John. And they were just very interesting. This one, however, didn't have much more of the mystery to solve, really. The second book did end on a bit of a cliffhanger, but it's not really that big of a deal in this story, I feel like. But ultimately, this does wrap up very neatly, and it was good to see a lot of these characters again and get some answers to how their story was going to play out. But I did listen to this one on audiobook as well, and so I don't know if I would have finished it as quickly as I did if I hadn't done that, just because it did feel very fillery. And it's also interesting, she put a final chapter in here that was fictional, but it was inspired by a real life hurricane that happened in St. John and kind of really affected the tourism there. And that was actually pretty interesting. I know that that island has some personal meaning to the author, so that was actually really cool of her to put in, and she does have an author's note about that as well. And the last book I read was The Vanishing Star by Maureen Johnson, which is the second in the Truly Devious series, and I gave this one 4.5 stars. I feel like it didn't blow me away as much as Truly Devious was. I think Truly Devious really surprised me with how enthralled I was in the story, but it was really nice to be back at Ellingham with Stevie and seeing all of the characters again and seeing how the mysteries that weren't necessarily wrapped up in the first book played out in this story. So Truly Devious, if you don't know, follows Stevie, who attends Ellingham Academy, which was founded by a very rich man in the 1930s, and he designed this school for students to come who are gifted and are bored in an ordinary education setting and have specific interests that they desire to pursue. So he created this safe place for them to come and focus on those interests. And in that first year, the founder's wife and child are kidnapped, and one of the students is also murdered. So the school has this dark aspect behind it, and it is a mystery that has not been solved. And Stevie's interest is actually mysteries, so that's what draws her to Ellingham, and she gets accepted, and she decides that for her big project she wants to solve the mystery of the Ellingham kidnapping. So we get a dual perspective here, because we get some of the things that happened in the 1930s, that first year the school was opened, but we also have Stevie's interactions as she comes into the school and makes new friends and is also thrust into some mysteries, and there are sinister things happening at the school while she attends. And as I've said many times when I've mentioned this story, is that it's really interesting to see the way that Stevie puts these clues together. And there's also anxiety rep in this, because Stevie has anxiety, and she's learned that her mysteries are something that she can kind of control. Solving those mysteries helps her focus her mind on something else, where she doesn't necessarily have those anxiety attacks that she was used to getting when she was at home. And so it's interesting to see how these serious situations that she is getting involved with affect her anxiety, but how she's learning to kind of rein that in and figure out how to cope with it. But I think that this was more of a filler book, but it definitely gave a lot of information about the mysteries and things from the school in the 1930s, and also while Stevie was there as well. So I think this was a great addition to the series. Okay guys, so that is all the books that I read in the month of November. If you read any of these, please let me know what you thought of them in the comments below, and be sure to check out my description below. I have all of my links where else you can find me on the internet. I don't think I really promote those links very often, so definitely check those things out. But for now, that is all for me, so bye!